Well, what do you think this is? Ooh, good guess. Anybody else? This guy's on the ball, like a 3D printed thing, Max said. Well, you can tell from the texture, yeah? You want to feel it? Yeah. Everybody want to touch it once? Yeah, you can touch it, Declan. There you go, Scarlett. Peyton, you want to touch it? All right. Well, you're right. It was made on a 3D printer, and it was supposed to hold screws, bolts, and nails in a carry case like this right here. So that's what it was supposed to be made for. But I'll show it up so the big people can see. They kind of like to look too. But when these little containers were made, they didn't fit right into this box. They had to make some new ones. They didn't fit right. So basically, these are useless. And look at, I've got a whole pail full of them. A whole pail full. Well, we'll look at that later, Declan. Okay, you can sit back down. So I was asked if I could use them. And I said sure, because I like to take things like that. Because I thought, I could put paper clips in them on my desk. Or I could put nuts or candy in them and then snack on them while I worked, right? Or my husband, he fixes small engines. Like here's this great big lawnmower, and when he's working on a small engine, and taking it apart, he could use one of these to put just loose to put the little screws and nuts and bolts and all that kind in there too. So he could probably, so they wouldn't get lost because he's kind of bad at losing things. So that would be useful too, right? So even though these little containers didn't turn out to be used as they were planned because they didn't fit right and they didn't seem to be good for anything, they ended up being useful to me, right? Right. Because I saw them differently than the makers did. I saw them differently. And this is what reminds me of a true story in the Bible that goes the same way. King Saul was the first king of Israel. But he did, because the people wanted a king, they didn't want the prophets anymore. So God made Saul the king, tried to make them happy, but King Saul didn't follow God's instructions. So the Lord rejected him as king of Israel. And the Bible says in 1 Samuel 15:35, it said, the Lord was grieved, or grieved that he had made Saul king over Israel. Grieved means he was very sad. He was very sad that he had made Saul king over Israel. And he said, it's time to choose a new king. So God sent the prophet Samuel to anoint a new king, and he said, I'm going to send you to Jesse of Bethlehem. Now, what does Bethlehem remind you of? Yes, because that's where Jesus was what? Born. That's where Jesus was born. But this was long before Jesus was born, and actually, Jesse, who Samuel was supposed to go see, was probably Jesus' great way back grandfather. So he's a relative of Jesus. And he said, I have chosen one of Jesse's sons to be his king. So they went to Jesse's house and they prepared to offer a calf in sacrifice to the Lord. And he invited Jesse and his sons to make themselves ready to come. Now, when they did a sacrifice, it's kind of like all of us coming together and getting our minds and our hearts ready to worship God. That's when we come to church. That's the same thing kind of that they were doing back then because they didn't have church like we do now then. So they would offer a sacrifice. And so he invited Jesse and all his sons to get ready for that. And then this is what the Bible tells us. And I'm going to read from 1 Samuel 16, 6 through 13. And at one point, I might point to you and give you a little instruction, so just listen. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, that's one of the sons, and thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. So Peyton, why don't you stand up? You're going to be Eliab. So can you stand up? You don't want to stand up? Okay, Scarlett, do you want to stand up for just a minute?
No, I understand that.
And well, you'll get your turn, Declan. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider the appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. Oh, you got to sit down. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab. Well, it must be Abinadab. And had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, mm-mm. The Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse then had Shammah. Who wants to be Shammah? Somebody want to be Shammah? Leah's going to be Shammah. Pass by, but Samuel said, nor has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had 7 of his sons. Sadie, you want to stand up? Declan, do you want to stand up? Anybody else that wants to stand up? And all these sons passed before Samuel. You know what? Mm-mm. So you got to get back down. You got to sit back down because the Lord had not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, he said, are these all the sons that you have? There is still the youngest, Jesse answered, but he is tending the sheep. There he is, out tending the sheep. And who do you think this was? It was David. It was David, the very youngest son. And so Samuel said, send for him because we will not sit down until he arrives. So he sent and had him brought in. He was ruddy, which means he had kind of reddish hair, which fits right in here, and with a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, arise and anoint him. He is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. So here's a picture that kind of shows us. So here's Samuel, and here's the father, Jesse, and here's all these brothers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And none of them were the right one except for David, the shepherd boy that had been out in tending his sheep. So maybe those first 7 sons, maybe they looked more wise looking, and on the outside they looked like they would be the right choice, right? But what did the Bible tell us? The Lord does not look on the outward that other people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. So it was the youngest son, maybe Declan reminds me of him, David, probably just a very young teenager out tending the sheep. But he wasn't considered important enough to bring back and meet the prophet Samuel. But he was the person that God had chosen as king of Israel. Because what could God see? God could see his worth. God could see his heart. And God can look into the future, right? So he could see that he would become a faithful king and a leader of God's people, Israel. So back to these little containers. They didn't turn out right for what was planned for them, did they? They didn't seem useful. But I found that they were useful, and God sees each one of you deep inside of you. He sees the wonderful person that you are. He sees that you're a child of His and all the wonderful ways that you can serve Him with your life. You can do great things for God and be used by Him. Do you want to do that? Sure you do. We all do. So each of you is going to get one of these little containers so you can each get one as a reminder. And can you take one for Isla, Scarlett? And then next week, I hope that you will tell me what you did with them. You know, if you used them for play or for pretend. I thought, like, if you had a little stuffed dog, you could use it for their little dog dish or something when you pretended. All kinds of ways. So next week when I come to church, you tell me what you did with them. And it will be interesting to know. But remember that you are important to God and you are useful to God. Okay? Thank you.